music going. Oh, I like this fireplace. It's even got snow.
Apparently a lot of fireplace ambiance settings on YouTube.
I like this one. Yes.
Nice. Yeah, this one has a little bit more of a like a chill lounge kind of vibe.
I mean, I was gonna say Christmas Eve, but yeah.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, and welcome to another creepypasta reading with the Roo Croo.
Yes, we are here to read more creepypasta. Is the thing that we are doing.
So pull up a seat, pick up your spectacles, and let's get going. This is I'm going first tonight, right? As usual. Yeah. I'm first to spook you spooktaculars tonight.
Go for it.
Yeah. So for submit for the approval of the Midnight Society, the cat scratching at my door by WeatherfordandSkye. Okay.
Alright.
I never thought a childish prank would save me and my brother's life. It began in late September. My family cat had passed from old age a few weeks prior. I missed her terribly and assumed the strange things that began to happen were just echoes of my grief. When she was still alive, she used to scratch at my door until I let her in my room, and she used to use the crawl space at my own little home, sometimes hide away for most of the day until pushing the door open in the middle of the night. I had gotten so used to it that I was no longer startled by the tap of little paws upstairs, the sound of little doors creeping open. So used to it, in fact, that when those same things happened after her death, it took me a while to notice. When I finally did notice, the sounds gave me a strange feeling of uneasiness but familiarity. I told myself that it was just the creaking of an old house, but a part of me wanted to believe that she was still here in some capacity. One night in October, I was awoken by scratching at my door and a faint meow. It lasted only a few seconds, but I heard it clearly. I thought it was a dream, but it had to have been. After all, she was gone. But then it kept happening. Every night at 1:46 a.m. I hear scratching at my door and the cries of a cat, which were long dead. I told no one of this because even though it frightened me, I didn't want to lose what I had left of my dear cat. The scratching stayed the same until the night of October 21st, when it became harder to ignore. Everything was normal that night. My parents had gone out for the night, and my brother was sleeping downstairs. Watched YouTube until I fell asleep, with the glow of my laptop slapped my face, or still my face. When I heard the scratching, I wasn't even scared. It felt like any other night, until it did stop. The scratching only got more frantic, and the crying grew in volume, and with each swipe of a claw, I never heard my cat act like this, even when she was alive. Cookie sat up from my bed and checked the time. 1:46 a.m., like always. The scratching got even worse. It sounded like she could tear through the door at any moment. I got up from my bed and slowly creaked open the door, and my heart was racing. I had no idea what was behind the door, but I had to open it. I opened the door, only a crack, and suddenly it pushed open. However, there was nothing behind the door. I felt a strange presence, like something came into the room. I don't know what else to do but to go back to bed and try to fall asleep. The next few nights were just the same, though. The scratching was almost deafening until I opened my door to let no one inside. It was creepy, but comforting. Every time I opened the door, it was like my cat came to visit me from beyond the grave. The last night I felt her presence was a night I would never forget. To this day, it was the most horrifying night of my life. It was Halloween night. I had just come home early from a party so I could stay with my brother for the night as my parents went out of town. We watched and made fun of Halloween movies from our childhood until midnight. I thought it would be funny to scare him with the scratching and meowing, so I told him to sleep in my room that night. I never thought a childish prank would save me and my brother's life. Got in my bed, and he got in a sleeping bag beside me. He fell asleep almost immediately when I could barely keep still from the anticipation. Suddenly, my window flooded with light. I assumed that my parents coming back ready for the trip, but something felt off. The clock struck 1:46 a.m. Instead of scratching or meowing, the little door to the crawl space flung open. A dark figure rushed out and jumped right at me. I let out a scream, walking my brother beside me, and a dark figure went through my chest and disappeared behind me. I was hyperventilating and holding my chest at that point. This wasn't a visit, it was a warning. I heard what sounded like someone was trying to get inside the house, and without hesitation, I grabbed my brother and told him to go in the crawl space. He was groggy and disorientated, but did what I had to say. I followed him behind and moved behind a chair in front of the little door before closing it. I told him to be completely silent. We heard a big crashing and footsteps downstairs. Someone had broken through the window. I heard the strangers open all the doors and push things over. I felt my face go white as I heard the stranger start to come up the stairs. I held my hand over my brother's mouth and began to pray in my head. The stranger was at the door. My heart was pounding. I flung the door open and entered the room. I could hear him flip my bed over and knock over my nightstand. I thought we were gonna die. My brother was silently texting the police while all I could do was stare at the door, knowing it would open any second. The stranger pushed over the chair in front of the crawl space. The only thing left between me and the intruder was a little door. My brother and I grabbed the handle and held it shut. I then heard the hiss and growl of a cat. It felt like it was right behind us. Finally, the intruder tried to open the door, and we held it shut as long as we could until the stranger flung it open with one great pull. Before I could even get a good look of him, the dark figure leapt out from behind us and pounced on his face. It happened so quickly you could see the flickering of blood flying around. He fell to the ground crying and holding his now mangled face. The dark figure ran into the shadows, and my brother and I ran out the door and down the stairs. We screamed for help, but out the cold door. In the cold, the neighbors came out to see what was wrong. The police arrived a short time after. It turned out the stranger was a drug addict, ex-convict who was breaking into people's homes around the area looking for cash. Well, and that's it.
Well, I'll be dipped.
I was longer than that, but okay.
Huh.
Is it longer than that?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit.
I probably won't.
Do it, Jonas!
Okay, fine. That ended a bit more abruptly than I thought it would. Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, I thought it was I thought it was longer than that. Oh,
Very well. Well, I guess it's my turn then. So,
is it, Jonas?
Yes.
Is it? Okay. So this is one I wanted to do last time I didn't actually get a chance to. It's submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This is a creepypasta called Ghost Train, written by Andrew Scolari and published on creepypasta.com. The house I grew up in was right next to a set of busy railroad tracks. From my bedroom window, I could watch the trains roll by. There were 3 types of trains that used these tracks, and still do to this day. There were the long, lumbering freight trains pulling boxcars, flatbeds, and tankers, which I would try and count as they clattered by. Then there were the fast-moving commuter trains out of the Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, aka MATA, or the M, as some people call it, and Amtrak passenger trains that would breeze by, heading to and from the central station in the heart of the city. Now, when most people see trains, they just see big machines rolling down ribbons of steel. But me, I saw trains as symbols of freedom and a way out of the hood. Whenever I saw a train, I would imagine all the places it was going to and coming from. Naturally, my favorite toys as a tyke were my Thomas the Tank Engine toys. I had all the characters: Thomas, Percy, Gordon, James, Toby, Daisy, all of them. When I was 10, my grandparents bought me a Lionel train set for my birthday. To me, it was the best present ever. It consisted of a steam train and 4 passenger cars. There was even a small bottle of drops you'd put in the smokestack that allowed the engine to make smoke. I'd spend hours watching that toy train run around the oval, pretending it was real and that I was driving the locomotive through forests, past fields, across mountains, and past small towns. I eventually developed other interests, mainly girls, but I still never lost my interest in trains. When I got older, I applied for a job as an engineer trainee on MATA, and I got it. For me, it was a dream come true. After I took the required classroom courses and exams, I soon found myself riding in the cab of the sleek diesel engines that pull the commuter trains. Now, the way the trainee program was set up was that they'd have you ride on different lines of the system for a few months with a regular engineer. I'd be on one line for a few weeks, and then I'd be assigned to another line in order to be familiar with the different routes. The M has 8 routes, all numbered. The main line is line 1, and all the branch lines are line 2, 3, and so on. I started on line 7 the first few weeks before being moved to line 8. Now, line 8, or the Cloverton line as it is sometimes called, is one of the longest branch lines on the system, second only to line 2, aka the Millersport line, The first time I rode on Line 8, it was with a veteran engineer named Hank. Now, Hank had been with the company from the beginning. When the old railroads decided they wanted out of the money-losing commuter services and handed all their locomotives and rolling stock to MATA. We had the Night Owl service, which starts at 7 p.m. and ends at 5 in the morning. We picked up our first passengers at Central Station, and were soon on our way to Cloverton. As we were going down the track, Hank turned to me and said, "There's something you should know if you're going to be working for this railroad, especially if they decide to put you here on Line 8 once they make you an official engineer." I looked at him and said, "Oh, and what's that?" Hank paused to blow the horn for a crossing and then said, "This line is haunted." I replied, "Haunted? How's the line haunted?" Hank looked at me and said, "It supposedly started with a curse. Back in the late 1800s, when one of the old railroad companies was building the line, the company built the line across the edge of an old farm that belonged to a man named Ezra Gray without his permission. Ezra demanded that the railroad move the tracks from his property and relay them somewhere else. But the railroad refused, due to it costing too much time and money to do so. Mr. Gray did try to sue the railroad, but was unsuccessful. You see, railroads were quite powerful back in those days, and the railroad had a lot of politicians and judges in their pocket. To add insult to injury, Ezra not only had to pay the court costs, but had to pay the railroad as well, for all the money they spent on the legal proceedings. This bankrupted Ezra, and he was forced to sell the farm, minus the small patch of land the tracks were built on. And Ezra Gray vowed to get even one way or another. When the line later opened up, Ezra stood on the tracks in front of the first train. The engineer tried to stop in time, but Ezra was hit anyway. Before he died, Ezra cursed the line, saying that it would bring death and sorrow. Ever since then, there were a lot of mishaps and accidents on these tracks, and many people lost their lives. It is believed that some of those who died haunt various spots, and that a few of the trains that crashed over the years come back as ghost trains, still rolling along these very rails we're on now." I looked at Hank as he blew the horn for another crossing. "Have you seen any ghosts on this line?" I asked. "Plenty," he said. "I've seen everything from headless trainmen to phantom lights and ghost trains." I didn't believe him at first, but didn't say anything. We eventually came to a curve in the track, and when we came out of it, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Coming at us was the headlight of another train. "Hank, for God's sake, man, put the brakes on," I shouted. "Don't you see the other train coming away?" Hank responded, "Yeah, I see it. Don't worry, we'll be fine." I looked at Hank and screamed, "Are you crazy? We're about to die!" Hank just pointed straight ahead and said, "No, we're not. Get a good look at that train." I did, and saw that not only the oncoming engine had the shape of one of the older type diesels like you see in photos, movies, and TV shows from the 60s, but it seemed to be a transparent shadow with a headlight and lighted cab windows. "What the?" I started to say, but then that shadow train hit us. Well, not hit us exactly, more like passed through us. Our whole cab was surrounded by shadows and streaks of light, as what looked to be a passenger train passed through, and I swear I saw the pale, wispy figures of people sitting in the seats. Soon it was gone, and the cab of our engine returned to normal. "What the hell was that?" I exclaimed. Hank turned to me and said, "That was one of the ghost trains I was talking about." "Well, what's the story with that ghost train?" I asked. Hank sighed and said, "Well, it all happened immediately after MATA was established and took over the commuter rail lines. An evening inbound train had just crested the long grade one right now, when it lost control and ran away all downhill before crashing and piling up on the curb at the bottom. Everyone on board was killed, and the cause of the wreck was blamed on the aging equipment they were using back then. Heck, with only a few exceptions, most of the engines, MATA got from the old railroads were 25 to 30 years old, and about 30% of the coaches used were even older. Not long afterward, the ghost of that train started making appearances along the stretch of track, becoming one of several ghost trains that haunt these rails." I looked at him, then out the front window of the engine. "What about the people back in the cars? Do you think they just saw what we saw?" I asked. Hank just shrugged and said, "Probably, but I'm sure most of them are used to it, so I wouldn't worry too much. Our conductor's probably taking care of things right now." We continued on to Cloverton and arrived on time. We made runs back and forth all night, and several times I saw some of the scary things that Hank had told me about. I was relieved when we finally tied up in the yard, leaving the coaches on one of the side tracks, and put the engine in the roundhouse. The next few nights, however, were hell. Every night run I'd had at least a few creepy encounters along Line 8, all of them with Hank, who had just shrugged them off as if they were nothing. But I guess after nearly 40 years, none of the ghosts bothered him anymore. After a few days, I was out on the day rounds, which was a relief to me, and I didn't have to worry about seeing ghost trains or headless trainmen again. I eventually became a regular engineer and was put on the main line run. I'm pretty content, but if the bigwigs for the AM ever decide to put me in the Line 8 owl service, I'll quit. It was a bit anticlimactic compared to what I was expecting, but whatever. There you go.
A little anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic tonight.
And then the monster jumped out and ate him.
Yeah, I was waiting for Hank to be like,
Skeleton popped out.
yeah. No, I was waiting for Hank to be like, and I'm a ghost too. You know, or something like that, you know, but apparently not.
That's my train. Get out of it.
And this happened to you too, and you don't remember it.
Yeah.
All right.
So I do have a question, Jonas. I noticed that was one of the that was on a list of creepypastas that you linked to all of us. Are those free for anyone, or do you want to do all of those?
Those are an open pool. Feel free to grab them. If you do one, I'll just take it off my own list.
Cool. Duly noted.
Although Miller requested that I put them in there, so don't grab them unless you
Yeah,
have.
because I was looking for some. I think I'm gonna pull one off of the suggestion form, though.
Okay.
Very well.
Okie dokie.
It's your
For
funeral.
the approval of the Midnight Society, I would like to direct your attention to document SCP-610. SCP-610, Object Class Keter. Special Containment Procedures. Due to the vast area of infection SCP-610 covers, containment is impossible. Isolation of the area has proved far more effective, and permission has been granted by the Russian government to establish a perimeter to keep people out of these areas under the guise of military operations. Should any organism displaying traits consistent with SCP-610 be sighted near this perimeter, then the established protocol requires it to be engaged at range with small arms until immobile, then dispatched using incendiary weapons and munitions from as great a distance as possible. Any living thing coming in physical contact with an organism infected with SCP-610 is considered expendable and is to be immediately terminated and incinerated. Any persons coming within 3 meters of SCP-610 infected life are to immediately withdraw from the area, be isolated from the rest of their team, and subjected to medical examination using only remote techniques to determine if infection has occurred, and appropriate steps taken based on that determination. At present, the known infection vectors for SCP-610 spread seem to be focused on physical contact. Drone movements within heavily infected areas have returned air samples containing minute particulate, which when exposed to organic compounds will result in the spread of SCP-610. The results of these particular tests have revealed that most require several days to manifest at all, with the exception of direct contact with exposed lung and liver tissue. These particular tests show a rapid rate of growth, which requires incineration of the testing environment no more than 24 hours after initial exposure, with even a 2-hour mishap risking a compromised facility event. Given that this kind of rapid growth only occurs in organic material existing outside the human body, this form of infection is currently considered a minor concern. These peculiarities have given rise to a series of questions regarding the possible origin of the infection in conjunction with the failed data expunged. Containment protocol remains at a scorched earth policy at this time, and no concern for transmission via water or air at infection parameters exists, barring situational changes in the field. Description: Initial reports of SCP-610 came direct from the Russian government through undisclosable channels. These reports consisted primarily of disappearances of farmers in the region, and were not considered until the local police, followed by the regional police, and finally a government-dispatched agent, all failed to report in within a 72-hour period. A small military contingent was dispatched to the area and quickly withdrew, at which point the Foundation was contacted to investigate. The area SCP-610 affects is close to Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. Areas of known infection are marked on a map provided to us here. Containment parameters are marked in blue surrounding these infection areas, and as of present, no further locations have been identified. Incursions into the perimeter must be reported prior to conducting, confirmed during exploration, and debriefed on immediately following return. SCP-610 appears to be a contagious skin disease, at first with symptoms including rash, itching, and increased skin sensitivity. Within 3 hours, the disease will cause blemishes, causing heavy scar tissue to form in the chest and arm areas, spreading to the legs and back within an additional hour, consuming the victim completely within 5 hours. Exposure to higher temperatures vastly decreases the time for the contagion to spread, and complete infections have been recorded occurring in as little as 5 minutes. After the completion of the infection occurs, the victim's life functions will cease for approximately 3 minutes, after which time they will restart at 2 to 3 times the activity rate of a normal human. Following this, the scar tissue on the victims will start to move of its own accord and grow at a rapid rate. Normal human features start to disappear at this point under the infection, and the path of mutation appears to be largely random. Subjects observed in this stage of infection have been recorded as growing 3 or more limbs of a type, such as arms or legs. The head may become misshapen and elongate or widen out, and parts of the subject may split open from which additional branches of flesh will grow. The duration of this stage of infection is unknown, and not all subjects appear to progress to the later stages. Under unknown conditions, an infected individual will cease moving and place itself in a location it deems suitable, where it roots itself. The fleshy growth on the victim will then begin to spread itself across all surrounding objects and consume them. Such objects do not spread the infection as living creatures do, however, and the effect of prolonged contact with these objects is recorded later in this document. It is assumed that this behavior is to create an area hospitable to continued growth of the other infected. Observation of life infected by SCP-610 by staff is impossible. Those infected with the disease immediately seek out aid as natural human impulse, resulting in unintended infections. Those infected past the scar tissue phase actively and aggressively attempt to infect anybody approaching them within an undefined area. It has been established that should an infected be capable of sight and observe an uninfected, it will proceed towards them. If the infected has lost the ability of sight, a range of approximately 30 meters is considered safe. Observation of SCP-610 infected settlements have been established using artificial methods such as remote robots. The data returned from these observations, coupled with the openly aggressive nature of the infected to attempt to spread SCP-610, has resulted in the Keter classification. However, so long as nothing is allowed to enter or leave the infected areas, it is considered a neutralized threat. Of concern are the cavernous areas beneath the infected settlements that were discovered during the exploration, and attempts to get research personnel into these areas are underway. Following are several field logs. For the benefit of those listening, I will read out the first one for us. After establishing the containment perimeter for SCP-610, the Russian government approved our request to research and investigate the area. For the first such exploration, a small camera-mounted unit known as Herbie was dispatched at a safe distance and directed towards Site A. Herbie has a battery life of 12 hours and a control range far wider than that was required for this dispatch. Herbie is able to enter Site A without incident. The landscape around Site A shows early stages of assimilation by singular SCP-610 infected, who have fallen at largely random intervals around what remains of the village. Many of the homes appear to have suffered fire damage, long since put out. However, a fair amount remain intact. Aerial reconnaissance of Site A combined with thermal imaging has put it at an estimated population of 79 infected. Immobile infected are included in this number. However, it is difficult to ascertain an exact percentage of mobile versus immobile. Varying degrees of physical mutation due to SCP-610 are present in Site A, and it is assumed that all the inhabitants are in advanced stages of infection. Herbie observed the exterior of the village for 2 hours, during which time all infected behaved with what appeared to be a loose sense of social structure. Because Herbie remained stationary during this observation period, it is unknown precisely what each individual infected person was doing. However, the central plaza experienced occasional bursts of activity and downtime. Requiring more information, Herbie was directed to follow an infected as it entered a home. Following is a transcription of what that camera feed allowed. There's bumpy camera feed as Herbie scoots over the gravel behind the quickly shambling infected person. The interior of this home is the same as that attached to the primary file for SCP-610. The infected being tailed is the one sitting at the table. After entering the home, Herbie's camera was raised slowly as to not draw attention. This action was either unnoticed or ignored. The infected person is watched from the doorway as it hobbles around the home and stops at each of the other visible infected organisms. However, it appears to ignore the one under the table, which, while not immobile, does not leave that area. What this creature was before infection is unclear. After lapping the table and repeating this procedure 3 times, the primary infected person, known as Alpha henceforth, stops at the bedridden infected, known as Beta, and proceeds to assault it with furious punches. Beta is unable to leave the bed for unknown reasons, but is not completely immobile, as it flails its arms in response to the beatings delivered by Alpha. After several sustained minutes of this beating, a piercing sound explodes from the area around Beta, who then proceeds to project a cloud of unknown matter into the air from its chest cavity. Alpha lingers in the cloud as it floats in the air around them, slowly descending to the ground. The unknown life form on the table, aside Beta, begins to twitch in an apparent seizure, and Alpha then laps the room twice more, stopping at each infected organism, but still ignoring the one under the table as well as Beta now. After these 2 laps, Alpha seats itself at the table and reaches out to position the 3 plates atop it as if setting a dinner set. After the plates are positioned, the facial tendrils extending from Alpha wiggle up and start to coil on one of the plates before tearing apart and separating. This is repeated at each plate. The image attached to SCP-610's primary file is a still image of this occurrence. After each plate is filled with Alpha's flesh, it leaves the table and approaches Herbie, which is moved from Alpha's path. Alpha leaves the home, but Herbie's camera remains focused on the table. After several minutes, a group comprised of 6 to 7 infected enter the room from outside, still ignoring Herbie. Each infected shambles as if movement is difficult, jerking in large steps or squirming in small ones. These infected all surround the table and each take turns grabbing handfuls of the flesh substance left behind by Alpha, pressing it into whatever orifices on themselves that they can. Some into mouths, some into the chest, some behind their backs, some under the arms. When all the plates are empty, this group leaves. Herbie remains here for several more minutes before checking its camera and leaving. Immediately after leaving the home, Herbie collides with an object. Panning the camera around, the obstruction appears to be Alpha, whose facial tendrils are intermingling with another infected having similar mutations. The impact is ignored, and the 2 infected part ways after several minutes. Herbie is then directed to explore more areas of the village. The remains of what appears to have been a store show signs of severe fire damage as well as activity inside the building, which Herbie moves to investigate. The door is slightly ajar, and with firm movements of Herbie, it is pushed open. No notice is taken of this action, or it is ignored. Inside the store are several infected persons, most of whom are standing around. However, one is on the ground, rolling back and forth over the space of approximately 0.3 meters, 1 foot, and is ignored by the others. Herbie rolls under the divider separating the cashier area from the customer area and pans around behind the counter. The upper half of a person is protruding from a cellar door behind the counter. This person does not appear to be suffering from advanced infection, and wears the garb of a Russian soldier. Herbie zooms the camera in to confirm identification, and it is noticed the eyes of this person are in constant movement, often focusing on Herbie. The rest of the soldier does not move. Herbie is directed to leave this area and proceeds to the back of the room. In this storage area, a large pile of bodies are stacked together. Some pieces of clothing are visible, and appear to contain both military garb and everyday clothing. No facial features are discernible on any of the bodies due to the way they are stacked. Atop the bodies, an infected sits, appearing to have its lower parts fused to the pile, with its upper half of it in a wild state of flailing and seizure. Approximately every 10 seconds, a burst of spores flies out the top of this infected, which linger in the air. Herbie is directed to leave the building. After leaving this building, Herbie passes by the village well, surrounding which are a series of immobile infected, all facing the well. The arms of each of these infected persons are stretched out, one in contact with the next, forming a perfect chain, save for one whose arms are down at its sides. Herbie passes by this last infected to approach what appears to have been a town hall or mayor's building, and the infected becomes mobile and snatches the rover up. Video feed from Herbie focuses on the face of the infected, which is strangely in perfect shape given the condition of the rest of its body, which is horribly bloated. This infected was once a young girl from appearance, age estimated 10 to 12. Herbie has rolled side to side in its grip as its face stares motionless at the rover. The infected's face suddenly balloons in size and explodes outwards into a series of fleshy flaps that grip Herbie and draw it inside. Herbie's video feed terminates here. Herbie was considered lost at this point. However, no one at control remembered to turn off the video feed, assuming it cut. 5 hours later, Herbie's video feed resumed, stationary and at a raised level pointing at the upper rim of the village well. The video feed contains some blur due to what appears to be a slimy film, which often oozes across the lens, but when not obscured, provides perfect quality recording. Herbie does not respond to any remote commands, but its video jerks back and forth from target to target, zooming in and out of its own accord. The video feed is cut manually, and all connections to Herbie's unit are ordered erased.
You know, it started out kind of like John Carpenter-ish, and then it sort of got into like Lovecraft territory a little bit. I like it.
Yeah, it makes me think of like Resident Evil. I thought that's kind of what it was going for. Was they're just trying to write an SCP of like one of the Resident Evil viruses.
Sounds like it. What was that one called again?
SCP-610.
Oh yeah, I've been meaning to suggest that we start linking these in the chat so people can check them out later.
I mean, yes, for some of the stories, yes. People know where to go to find an SCP story.
Well, I mean, fair, but...
It's behind you.
It's SCP-2610, and it does not seem to have another name.
Yeah. You'll find it.
Or
if you're lucky.
Will find you!
Alright. Rick, I hand you the talking stone.
Okie dokie. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. Devil in the Details by Katherine C. Trevor looked at the sweaty, crumpled paper in his hand, reviewing the instructions yet again. Soon it would be too late to read over them, but until then every rehearsal could be the one that saved his life. 4 pale candles, he read, then glanced over to the 4 candles sitting on the floor. He had arranged them in a perfect square, just as instructed. A line of crisp white chalk connected them, and he mentally marked the next item off the list. His hand was shaking, making it harder to read the scrawled lines of pencil on the paper. With a deep breath, he looked away from the paper and out the window. There was a swell of nervous energy bubbling in his chest. He had prepared, he reminded himself. He had read and studied. He had memorized every line of text and done his research. Now was no time to have second thoughts or doubts. Remember, the entity will know your thoughts. If you enter with doubts, he will use these to his advantage. Trevor closed his eyes and smiled, trying his best to think confident and reassuring thoughts. What he needed to do, he realized, was find something else to think about. Every review of the instructions only deepened his anxiety, and it obviously wasn't helping. It reminded him of cramming for final exams. He'd always overdone it and worn himself out, so that he ultimately spent a week sick and dreading the impending tests. Now was not the time to weaken his mental or emotional defenses. It was, instead, the time to finally achieve something with his life. Trevor walked away from his preparation, shoving the paper in his pocket and trying to prevent his mind from running over and over the instructions. They always hung on the final words. If you successfully complete the ritual, he will grant you 1 request for whatever your heart desires. Choose wisely. As if he could dislodge the thoughts, he shook his head sharply and turned his attention to his surroundings. He was sitting in front of an old chapel, the wooden pews cracked and listing in the shadows. What had once been lovely windows were now either caked with dust, webbed with cracks, or lying broken on the floor. The moon sprinkled silver light around the interior, light which somehow only made the shadows darker. He wondered briefly about those who had once gathered here, bowing penitently and singing their hymns, but the churches dried up when a town did, and it was nothing more than an artifact cast out. Find a place of religious significance. It may be a church, temple, synagogue, mosque, sanctuary, blessed space, or area of miraculous happenings. Any place where people come to demonstrate faith will suffice. Trevor smirked, remembering the words. He had considered going to his hometown's football stadium because that's where he had witnessed the greatest religious fervor, but somehow he thought such a secular praises were not what the ritual intended. He had lucked upon this place in one of his trips to and from university. It was off the beaten path, well removed from the rest of civilization. Soybean fields were the nearest attraction, which meant he would be mostly free to conduct his activities in peace. Assuming, of course, local kids did not wander in, drawn by the same isolation and freedom that had brought him. Given the lack of beer bottles and vandalism, he assumed it was not a popular place for such activities. His legs were shaking up and down, whether from excitement or anxiety he was not sure. He checked his watch, noting that it had slipped 5 minutes closer since his last inspection. It was now 11:50, which meant his waiting was almost over. It must begin at precisely midnight. Too early or too late, and you will have no results but the feeling like a fool. He had set and reset his watch just to be certain it was exact. Now he just needed to rely on it. He had also selected this position because it was just close enough to hear the church bells from a couple towns over. Come midnight, they would toll and assure him he was on time. The wind kicked up outside, tossing a few stray leaves through the opening. The many holes in the roof howled pitifully, and the rest of the building creaked with the gusts. It seemed almost as if the building was in its final days, waiting for nothing but a strong storm to destroy it once and for all. Giving in to his worries, Trevor pulled the paper from his pocket and reviewed the important parts again. He skimmed over the materials, certain he had everything he needed. Instead, he reviewed the cautions to ensure he did not make any deadly mistakes. First, never speak your name. Such a being will seek any way to gain power over you. Should this creature find any weakness, he will use it to possess you. This is akin to being split apart from the inside out, slowly and over several days. Most unfortunate souls are also forced to watch as they slaughter family, friends, and other victims. It was simple enough, no names. That was an easy pitfall to avoid. Next, do not answer his questions. They are intended to trick you. You must only say what you have been instructed and your request. If you engage in questions, he will trap you in his game. You will slowly waste away, caught forever in his web of lies. Trevor had always been taciturn, so he was not concerned. Remaining silent was his primary skill in life, and he looked forward to putting it to good use. He also could not help but wonder who in their right mind would try to best a demon in a duel of wits. Seemed like one of the oldest follies. Third, ensure all barriers are maintained for the duration of the ritual. You will be unable to touch or harm you physically while the barriers are active. Adhere to the guidelines for your own safety. Another easy warning to heed. Who would ignore the barriers? Why would they even be in the ritual if they were not vital to its safe and successful completion? Finally, believe nothing of what he says. He exists only to lie. Rereading the warnings made him feel safer. These were so obvious that he could not imagine anyone making such grievous errors. He certainly knew better, and if the direst warnings in the ritual were so clear to him, it seemed impossible that he might fail. The clock hand spun closer, and he moved back to his prepared space. There were 4 candles, a 5th, and a black candle setting to the side. There was a silver bowl of blessed water, secured from the local cathedral some days before. Also a lighter, a scrap of cotton cloth, and a steel knife. It was everything he needed. Trevor knelt beside the chalk square, arranging and rearranging items for the most practical setup. He wanted everything in arm's reach, but also in the order it would be needed, which meant, he thought, the lighter, the bowl, the knife, the cloth, and finally the candle. It was midnight, he saw. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he heard the bells ringing. Right on time, he brought the lighter to the first of the 4 candles, slowly moving clockwise and lighting each in turn. They flickered and snapped in the breeze, but remained strong. His hands were unsteady as he picked up the bowl and set it in front of him. With a deep breath, he gripped the knife in his hand and drew it smoothly across his palm, just like they did in the movies, only it seemed to hurt worse than the actors let on. Let a few drops fall into the water, then bandage yourself carefully. The sin of blood can attract other things that you may not wish to deal with during the ritual. Trevor followed the instructions to the letter, turning the water a cloudy red with his own blood before tightly wrapping his hand with the cloth. He knew the next steps by heart, moving through them almost robotically. Each step had been dutifully practiced, with the exception of cutting his own hand, many times in the bright light of day. Now he lifted the bowl carefully with both hands, watching the way it rippled and changed. His blood diffused through the water, leaving darker and lighter patches that were quickly settling into the same pale shade. I summon you here with this dedication. Arrive! With the last word, he tipped the water into the middle of the square. Unlike in the practice session, the water rolled and then stopped at the chalk outline, forming a tiny pool that defied the laws of gravity and surface tension. Trevor's mouth hung open briefly, but he knew he had to continue. The black candle was already in his hand, and he lit it despite the increasing wind. Gently, he placed it in the middle of the square, watching the tiny flame flick on the surface of the water. I give you light to seek me, he said, the words trembling from his lips. Arrive. Barely were the words out of his mouth and the black candle began to sink below the surface of the water before disappearing completely. A dark, shadowy face emerged on the surface of the water, grinning widely. The face was hard to discern, but appeared dark and scaly, riddled with scars and fresh wounds that seemed to seep blood into the water around him. There were also many, many teeth. Trevor felt a cold pit of fear settle solidly in his stomach. "Who summons me?" came the deep, gravelly voice. It came not from the thing's moving lips, but from the air all around Trevor. The whole building seemed to vibrate with the voice. No names, no questions, he reminded himself. Trevor's mouth was dry, thinking just how easy it would have been to make that mistake. "You have been summoned, and I will instruct you. Speak your name." The church chuckled in time with a reflection in the water. He was smiling, showing even more teeth than Trevor thought he could physically exist in the span of that face. "Who are you to think you can command me, mortal?" came the bone-aching words. They seemed to vibrate through Trevor's body as if he was being pulled apart by reverberations alone. "Speak your name," he said again through gritted teeth. The demon stretched, his arm stabbing through the surface of the water and entering this world. The water trickled off them, stumbling over protruding scales and nodules. Cruel claws shone through the candlelight, covered with water and a viscous red liquid that Trevor knew by sight. The smell of rot and decay followed quickly thereafter, threatening to bring up Trevor's meager dinner. "I have summoned you, and you will obey my commands. Remain within the summoning area." "Oh? Shall I obey you and remain here?" asked the beast mockingly, planting one hand on either side of the puddle, outside the thin chalk lines. A deep rolling chuckle emerged this time as he pulled himself slowly through the pool and into reality. The floorboards of the church appeared to buckle and stream wherever the claws pierced. "He will try to intimidate you. Stay strong." "Remain within the summoning area. Speak your name." Trevor tried to force all of his courage and confidence into his voice, but only made the demon laugh all the louder, now standing at his full height. The beast looked down on the pale boy before him. You can call me Trevor," came Trevor's voice from his monstrous visage. Let me read that again. "You can call me Trevor," came Trevor's voice from his monstrous visage. Trevor froze, his mouth agape and eyes wide. For an instant, the demon appeared almost sympathetic, but the facade cracked into merciless anticipation as a shadow flickered over his face. "You have meddled with something you do not even understand," it said, voice again deep and roaring, but now mimicking the disappointed tone of a schoolteacher. I never told you my name. You can't know my name," Trevor stammered, his fear getting the better of him. His eyes flickered from the face to the arms of the rooted feet, never sure where to stay or linger. Everywhere he looked, there was impossibility. "You think I need you to tell me your name?" Casually, the demon stretched, muscles and joints popping and cracking as if it had been a millennia since he moved about. His eyes, dark with unholy light, fixed upon Trevor with predatory amusement. He answered his own questions with a deep shake of his head, sending water sizzling across the sanctuary. Trevor began scooting backwards, whimpering with fear as the monster before him took one broad step forward. There was really nowhere to escape. The candles slowly snuffed themselves out, leaving only the moonlight to glint off those smiling teeth. "But," Trevor gasped as his hands scrambled along the floor for anything that might help, "but I followed all the instructions!" The creature paused to survey the assembled implements and the chalk square. "Yes, you certainly did." The building trembled with the force of the laugh. From the cloying darkness, an arm shot forward. In the next breath, Trevor was off the ground. The demon slowly drew him close until their eyes were level. "Who do you think wrote the ritual in the first place?" "He only exists to lie."
He exists to lie.
Yeah.
Total beginner mistake.
Should have realized that when it said that he can read your mind. So
Total beginner mistake. Just embarrassing.
Totally.
Boy, does he ever have egg on his face.
In hell.
Yes, it's a hell omelet.
a Hamlet.
A homlet, yes.
Omelet, if you will. Yeah.
Helmet?
A helmet.
That's something different.
I did enjoy that though. That was pretty fun.
Pretty cool.
but the demon is off my Christmas list.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just rude.
Yeah, you can't have lies on Christmas Eve.
Exactly.
All that lying.
See, you get it.
Now he'll just wander the earth telling lies. That's what demons do, right?
Yes.
I'm kind of surprised you didn't
totally.
go for a Monty Python thing there. Monty Python thing there, where you're like, you can call me Trevor. Be like, oh, I can't remember it.
Plot twist, Trevor actually was the demon's name. It was just a weird coincidence. Alright, well, I guess it's me?
Yes,
next?
it is your
It
turn.
is you.
Oh, my goodness.
You can't escape your
Mercy,
fate.
mercy me. Whatever shall I do?
What shall you do?
Well, this one's on the list of requests. I did read it last year, but it's a classic, and people like it quite a bit. So, I feel like maybe it wouldn't be too much of a sin to read it a second time.
Okay.
What do you think?
We can do that.
Very well, then. Let me take a quick sip of my elixir of life, which is called water. And here we go. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. I call this story by its title, because I'm not the one who named it. This story is called Smile Dog. You try to tell yourself over and over, it's just an image. Just a stupid picture of a stupid dog that someone has photoshopped teeth onto. It isn't even scary, or at least it doesn't scare you. Not one bit. How could it scare you? It's just a picture. You tell yourself these things, but when you do, you lie. The image does scare you. Something about that smile, too wide with too many teeth, the same all the better to eat you with smile that the big bad wolf gave to Red Riding Hood. A smile full of threat and sharpness, a predatory smile. Again, you try to bury the idea, to ignore it, but it's no use. Even when you close your eyes, you see it, smiling maniacally behind you, the eyes illuminated and searing, burning into your mind, your soul. You know right then you have to get rid of it, to pass the image on to someone else, to do as the thing says and spread the word. You know that you'll do these things because you must. Because if you don't, you know that eventually he will pay you a visit. The Smile Dog creepypasta, also referred to as smile.jpg, concerns a supposedly cursed or demonic image of a Siberian husky with a menacing expression and an exaggeratedly large smile from a mouth seemingly filled with human teeth. According to the story, this image depicting Smile Dog is an image of a demon or evil spirit that then plagues and torments anyone who has looked upon it with horrendous visions and nightmares, impelling them to spread the word by sharing the image with others. The longer the victim continues without sharing the image, the more extreme the haunting becomes, and if the image is not shared, then Smile Dog takes his true form, either killing the victim, driving them to the point of insanity, or in many versions, dragging them away to hell. The original image associated with the smile.jpg/smiledog creepypasta shows a Siberian husky with what appears to be a heavily photoshopped mouth. The husky is gray-black, and the image shows only the head and neck with prominent pointed ears. The eyes of the dog are illuminated by the camera flash so that they take on a glowing quality, and the manner in which the dog is looking directly into the lens as if posing for a portrait in disturbingly human fashion. Most unsettlingly, however, is the smile, which aside from appearing too wide for the mouth itself to contain, seems not to contain canine teeth, but more human or primate. I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007. I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terrence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer gathering information for a few early college assignments and, if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on unrelated business, but at the last moment Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For half an hour I sat with Terrence as we camped outside the bedroom door, I listening and taking notes while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense, but fit with the pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terrence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time, I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary E. was the sysop for a small Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile.jpg, and her life changed forever. She and Terrence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she is the only one who has spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous, or are, perhaps, dead. In 2005, when I was only in 10th grade, Smile.jpg was first brought to my attention by my burgeoning interest in web-based phenomena. Mary was the most often cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as Smile.dog, the being Smile.jpg is reputed to display. What caught my interest, other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity toward such things, was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists other than as a rumor or hoax. It is unique because, though the entire phenomenon centers on a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly, many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up with the most frequency on sites such as the image board 4chan, particularly the X-focused paranormal subboard. It is suspected that these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile.jpg is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. This purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like Smile.jpg is regarded with such disdain, since it is patently absurd, though depending on whom you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge Smile.jpg's existence might just as much be out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile.jpg nor Smile.dog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such other, perhaps more scandalous shock sites as Hello.jpg or Two Girls One Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile.jpg is summarily deleted by any of the encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legend. Mary E.'s story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up in the early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale that in 2002 a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website Something Awful with a deluge of Smile.dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s that Smile.jpg circulated on Usenet, and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject line, "Smile, God loves you." Yet, despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile.jpg often weakly joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo. A dog-like creature, usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of the camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog, or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim to have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split in a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, very human-looking teeth. This is, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims, who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their mind's eye during the time they are, in reality, having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminably, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though in some cases it is more effective than others. Mary E., I assumed, was not on an effective medication. That was why, after my visit to her apartment in 2007, I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the name of a supposed victim of Smile.jpg who felt more interested in talking about his experiences. For a time, nothing happened, and at length I completely forgot about my pursuits, since I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008. To email address redacted, from email address redacted. Subject, last summer's interview. Dear Mr. L., I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realized that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time, I was afraid. You see, for 15 years, I have been haunted by Smile.jpg. Smile.dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it is true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any real dreams I have ever had. I do not move and I do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile.dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, although I am not quite sure what it really is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word. That is how it phrases its demands. And I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in the mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3.5-inch floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a coworker. I could even show it to Terrence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile.dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet if it lied, what would I do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things. Every night for 15 years, Smile.dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years I have stood strong, though there have been hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board where I first encountered Smile.jpg stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They are the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, Mr. L., but last summer when you contacted me and my husband about an interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile.dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with, and I thought I would not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing, was plotting to ruin your life. I could not stand the thought, and in fact, I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L, and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then more wholly depraved, someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile.dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Mary E. Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself. While cleaning up the various things she'd left behind, closing email accounts and the like, he happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette, he revealed, and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that most disturbed him, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted, like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with the couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that, for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world has odd ways of testing us. Almost a full year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email. To, email address redacted, from, email address redacted. Subject, Smile. I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you are interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not as bad as everyone says. I have sent it to you here. Just spreading the word. Open parentheses, colon. The final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was one file attachment called, naturally, Smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was most likely a fake, I imagined, and even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of Smile.jpg's peculiar powers. Mary E.'s account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyway. After all, how could a simple image do what Smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, and if Mary turned out to be correct, if Smile.dog came to me in my dreams, demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I died? Or would I simply spread the word, eager to be put to rest? And if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about Smile.jpg, I decided, I could attach it as evidence. And anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest would be affected. And even assuming the Smile.jpg attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes. Yes, I could.
Or could you?
Or did I?
Don't click that link. Don't do it. Don't listen to his lies.
But it's a floppy. I want the floppy.
Don't copy that, floppy.
There's a couple of things. There's a couple of comments I want to make on this one. For one thing, I think it's kind of interesting that like it's an inversion of the whole like human with scary feral canine teeth thing. It's a dog with human teeth, and somehow that's more menacing. And that's one thing. And we're at the point now where, for this generation, the floppy disk is this archaic form of media that's inscrutable and creepy. You know, like when we were kids, it was like the creepy old wax cylinder. You know, that would be the cursed thing, right? You know, like, you start listening to the wax cylinder and then it plays Glad to Benedicto, and that's how the demons come out. So I just think it's funny because like it's a floppy disk, man.
I still love I think it was a Tumblr post I saw where they were just like, remember when a 3.5-inch floppy could destroy the world? And it was scenes from like Gargoyles and Yu-Gi-Oh! And all these different cartoons where it's like the main villain is like, I have the super virus that will destroy all computers in the world. And it's just on a fucking blue, normal floppy disk.
It's like, we only have an hour until it uploads because it's 300 baud.
Oh my god.
Good times. Simpler times. All right, I pass the torch on to, I guess it's GC again.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so I'm not sure if we read these ones. Let me see here, but I found two that piqued my curiosity tonight. So, let's make for the approval of the Midnight Society. I give you the Room City by. Actually, there's no offer on this one. Let's see here. What's it? Nope. They don't have an offer's name on this. Anonymous at this guess. All right.
The plot twist is the author was you, GC.
Yes, I am the author. Thanks for figuring it out. Oh no, I've ruined. I was referred by a temp agency. I had no idea who I would be working for or what the job would entail. I didn't know that the pay was good. A week long excursion at $725 a night. More than enough pay to pay off a couple of credit card bills and a good chunk of next month's rent. For that price, I would have done almost anything. I would wish I knew at the time what I was getting myself into. When I arrived at the address, I was surprised. It was a large facility at the end of a dirt road in the woods, 2 towns over. A large sign outside read, Simplify Corp. It was a plain, white, 3-story building void of identifying marketing. Its appearance gave me no clue to its purpose. Its location was even more baffling. Going off by the name alone, I had to assume it was some sort of biotech company. I was probably needed to clean up radioactive waste or something to that end. For what they were paying me, I would happily risk my health. Upon entering the building and meeting with the receptionist, I was directed to room 371 on the 2nd floor, where I would wait for Al, my new boss. It's your standard office setting, a bit more quaint than usual. Red carpet, white walls, no windows. Only 6 desks and 3 rows of 2, each with their own computer. At the back of the room was a large wall covered by a one-way mirror, an opening with steps on either side of it. Inside was a single chair, a desk, and landline phone, probably a place for supervisors to oversee productivity. But other than that, the room harbored no points of interest unless you fancied the waste bin and fern in the corner. An older gentleman opened the door to the room and came over to shake my hand, introduced himself as Al. He seemed to be in a rush, wasting no time in describing the task at hand. I was to stay in that very room from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. the following day, every night for a week. He left me a cell number and a laminated list of rules to be followed. He told me he could not overstate enough the importance of following each and every one, exactly as they were outlined. Once he was sure I understood the gravity situation, he left me with my first shift in peace, closed the door behind me. That was it? Really? Just stay in the room for 10 hours a night? I had no clue as to why I was being paid over $5,000 to room set, but I learned some time ago to never look a gift horse in the mouth. I simply sat down in the overseer's room with a smile on my face and went over the list of rules. There were 10 in total, all of which left me more than a little confused. Number 1. Once 8 o'clock rolls around, lock the door and do not leave the room for any reason until 6 o'clock. Plan your bathroom usage and meals periods accordingly. No food or drink items within the room. Number 2. Do not use Hank's computer. It's closest to the exit. No one is ever to touch it, under any circumstances, not even Hank. Number 3. If the phone rings, answer it, but do not talk. No matter what the voice on the other end says, you are not to respond. Hang up after 2 minutes have passed. Number 4. Do not let the janitor in. We don't have one. Number 5. If anyone comes to the door, let them in, but ignore them. Do not react whatsoever. When they leave, shut the door and lock it behind them. Number 6. If the waste bin changes location, place it back at the corner as soon as you notice. Number 7. If I stop by, only let me in if I know the password. Number 8. At 9:30 precisely, set each of the computer's home screens to different URLs, except Hank's. Do not react to the images. Act normal. Number 9. If you see Harvey, feed him one of the treats from Lisa's desk. The one opposite Hank's. Number 10. If there's an emergency, call myself not after 10:05 p.m. Below the last rule was a final sentiment scribbled over the laminated pen. No one has made it past night free. Good luck. I was perplexed, wondering for a moment if Al was a lunatic and if there was a reason no one else had lasted. Perhaps his quirks were too much for the previous candidates and they backed out, fearing for their safety at the hands of his fragile mind. I would not be swayed so easily. Even if Al was crazy, I would happily take his money for what was shaped up to be a very simple job. At least that's what I thought. Day 1 was utterly boring. Nothing remarkable happened. Definitely not anything to the extent of what Al's list would be expect. At 9:30, I even changed the URLs of the computers, for no other reason to feel somewhat useful. Next night, however, was a little different. Day 2 started as it normally did. I settled in for another long night, making sure to eat and empty my bladder before locking myself in. At 9:20, just as I was about to ready myself to change the home screens again, I saw it. This bin was right there at the top of the steps to the overseer's room. Sure, he had placed it there. I got the small spike in my adrenaline before calming down with a smile. The waste bin, the list. It was a joke at my expense. Al would be in the next room, waiting anxiously to see the look on my face. I raced out to the office floor. There was no one there. I walked over to the exit and shook the knob. It was still locked. Confused and a tinge scared, I swiftly picked up the waste bin and walked it back to the corner of the room. I checked the time, 9:30. I started changing the URLs of all the computers, hoping desperately that I had imagined what had just occurred. After skipping Hank's desk, I typed the last website on PC number 6. I was about to pull away when some strange imagery manifested on the screen. It was surveillance footage of the room, the very room I was in. I saw me look at the computer, turned and looked up, but there was no camera. Upon looking back at the screen, I saw something terrifying. I watched as a copy of me stepped out from the overseer's room. I walked behind me, grabbed a hard drive from one of the desks, and wound up to strike me in the back of the head. I quickly turned to shield myself. Turned back and the screen changed, displaying the website I entered just normal. I raced back to the overseer's room and sat down more than a bit frazzled. Contemplated walking out, but I steeled myself to continue. It was fine after all. Maybe Al was a lunatic, but he didn't seem the type to wish me any harm. Not that I knew him all that well. Still, I hadn't sustained any damage. I was questioning my sanity, yes, but no bodily injuries following me. Whatever was at play here seemed harmless so far. Knock, knock. There was a loud banging. Having just had that horrifying experience in my life, I nearly jumped out of my skin. A voice penetrated the door. "It's the janitor. Just here to clean up. Can you open the door?" I recalled rule number 4 and denied him entry. "You did good not letting him in. You followed the rule. Now you're fine. So long as you follow the rules, you'll be safe. It's as simple as that. I can see this through." Knock, knock. I jumped again. Really need to get in there and clean up. Open the door. I took a deep breath and peeled back my anxiety, successfully ignoring the janitor until he left. This was an accomplishment for me, and it actually felt pretty good. A challenge that I was able to best. While I remained on my edge of my seat, the next few hours were uneventful. I even dozed off for a moment at one point. It was until 2:30 a.m. that my next challenge would come. A multicolored cat jumped up on my desk in front of me, complete with beautiful splotches of black and orange. I was startled, but it seemed to be friendly, brushing up against my arm. The name of its collar was Harvey. I knew what I had to do. I had to rummage through Lisa's desk, found the jar of treats, and fed Harvey one, which he purred delight, and to my astonishment, he then charged the door, phasing right through it. My mouth was agape in awe. Once my initial bewilderment dissipated, though, it was replaced with satisfaction and another small victory. As strange as it may sound, I was beginning to like this job. Ring, ring. It was a landline. Remember the rules, I removed it from the receiver and held it to my ear, making sure to keep an eye on the time. Hey, it's Al. I'm going to be stopping by pretty soon to do a little work. How's the job treating you so far? I remained silent. Hello? You know you can talk to me. It's me, right? I picked up the set of rules, looked over them again. There was nothing about Al calling. I didn't respond. There is no way to treat your employer. If you don't say anything, I'll have no choice but to fire you. Do you really want that? I stood my ground. Only 12 seconds ago. Fine. I'll see you soon and relieved of your duty. I guess you couldn't even make it past night 2. The 2-minute mark came and I hung up on him. I felt safe as another hour went by, reflecting on the trials I'd faced thus far. I was bewildered but determined. I wasn't going to let the room cloud my judgment. I was in control. Knock, knock. It's Lisa. Can I come in? While hesitant, I had to abide by Rule 5. We opened the door and a woman entered. It must be the new guy. What do you think of the place? I went back to my desk in the overseer's room and sat down, trying my best to act casual. Lisa walked up to the glass, knowing I could see through. Not very talkative, are you? Her eyes unnaturally darted around in all directions and her skin drooped a bit, almost as if it was falling off a bare bone. I didn't answer. She didn't speak again. Instead, she stared at the glass for a long time, long enough to leave me feeling truly unsettled. She had waltzed in, stopped at my side, raising her arm. Hope she would notice that my breathing had become sporadic and labored. She then violently swung down on the desk, creating a thunderous clap. I almost winced, but held my composure. After another awkward 5 minutes or so, she left. I ran to the door and locked it behind her. A few moments later, there was yet another knock. This time, it was a boy, claiming to be searching for his father. I let him in and sat back down. He tried many times to ask for my help, but I was careful to ignore him, just like I did with Lisa. At one point, however, I made the mistake of meeting his gaze. For an instant, in between blinks, his eyes became pitch black, void of all color. Startled, I nearly jolted back, but was able to restrain myself. Like Lisa before him, the boy eventually left, quickly locked the door behind him. Another rule followed. Other than the waste bin moving around a few times, nothing else ever happened that night. Before I knew it, time to go home. I heavily considered calling it quits and may have had even a nightmare or two upon sleeping that day, but I found myself excited to continue, wondering what obstacles the room would throw at me next. Curiosity shouldn't have been enough to bring me back, but all rational trains of thought escaped me. The room had this pull that beckoned me to it. I was hopelessly compelled to return Powders to its call. An excuse would have sufficed, but as such, I resumed my post to follow the night. Upon starting my shift, I was confident, and I had dealt with quite a few absurdities up to this point, and waited patiently for my next opportunity. A couple of hours went by with no trouble, no cat, no images on the computer, no phone calls, and no waste bin antics. Boredom was beginning to set in when a loud knocking broke the silence. Knock, knock. There was no voice. I yelled out from the overseer's room. "Who is it?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "It's me, Al." I picked up the list and reread rule number 7. "What's the password?" Aaron chuckled to himself. "I never wrote a password." He was right. There was no password on the rules. It must have been him. I cautiously made my way to the door and opened it. Al was there to greet me with a smile, and I sighed in relief. Let me guess. Scared of things that go bump tonight? He laughed at my clear nervous disposition. "You have no idea." He shut the door and set up some things at one of the computers. "Say, why did you write down a password?" I asked. He smiled again. "It's a ploy. Anyone posing as me might try to come up with one, which would identify not as being me. Understand?" "I see." Good thinking. He returned to his computer, and I didn't want to bother him, but I just had to know. What is this place, anyway? Why do these things happen here? He turned to face me. "It's best if you don't ask questions, especially ones that are far above your pay grade." I wasn't happy with my answer, but I knew it was all I could get out of him at this point. I let him work in peace and sat down at the overseer's room, watching through the one-way glass. That's when I realized something. The computer AI Al was using was Hank's. I double-checked the list to make sure. Yeah, that was definitely Hank's desk, and no one was to touch his computer. Didn't that apply to Al as well? I turned over to the list of off chance I might find some more information, and that's when my heart sank. In large, bold print at the back of the laminated sheet was text that read, "Password. Diner." Fuck. I grabbed my phone, reached for the scrap of paper with Al's number on it, and dialed as fast as I could. There were a few tones, but he finally picked up. "Hello? Everything all right over there?" "Al, thank goodness. I made a mistake. I thought it was you." I let him in, and now he's on Hank's computer. He let a long sigh, disappointed. I watched as Al's copy turned from his computer and then stood up. Listen very carefully. Do not act suspicious in any way. You should be fine if he doesn't suspect anything. If you try to leave for call or anyone else, it'll be all over. Understand? Yes, I understand. Al's copy began walking to the overseer's room. My heart was beating faster than anything before I knew. "I'll be there soon. Just don't panic." Al hung up. I kept the phone in my ear as Al's copy approached, and as I pretended I was talking to his wife. "I told you, hon. 6 o'clock. That's when I clock out. You don't have to wait up for me. You worry too much. Please, just get some rest." Al's copy was in the room with me now, staring. He had the phone by his chest and looked back at him. "Everything okay?" I asked. He continued to stare for a few seconds. "Can you help with something on this computer?" What if he could see my chest pounding? Sure. I just need to finish this phone call. I'll be there as soon as I can. He stared for another moment and walked back to Hank's desk. While panicked, I kept up appearances by continuing to pretend on the phone. I even acted out an argument to lengthen the call. While doing this, I watched with bated breath as the knob gently turned and the door swung open. It was Al. I'd never been so relieved in my life. He turned the glass and put a finger to his mouth and gestured for me to keep quiet. The clone was not yet privy to his arrival, and Al snuck up behind his clone and grabbed him by the throat. The imposter struggled, but eventually succumbed to his vicious grip. He fell to the floor, a lifeless hull, before disintegrating into the carpet. I ran to Al and thanked him, and I also apologized profusely. No need to be sorry. This is the first time I had to make it into this room. And I'm sure it won't be the last either. I'm just glad you're okay. He smiled and said, "Speaking of which, mind shutting the door? Wouldn't want another one of me stopping by." Oh, of course. Walked over the door and realized something. I left it unlocked after the copy came in. That's how Al was able to enter. Remember the final rule, I slowly pulled out my phone and opened the call log. Most recent call connected at 10:18 p.m., 15 minutes past the deadline. I turned around and saw Al standing right behind me. "Al? What's the password?" He grinned. "What password?" I ran out of there as fast as I could. The room still had a strange hold over me, but I was never going back. At least, I hope I won't. Ow!
Like that one.
Not bad. Not bad at all. Alright. So,
It's another
So
Jonas.
yeah, it's not me. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, this story is called Please Stay Awake. It was written by J.T. Grogan and published on creepypastas.com. Dark, cold, and eerie. Those are the only words I can come up with to describe the house in which I had lived with my family for the majority of my life. Mostly dark, blistering cold during the winter, and always eerie. Sometimes there would be strange noises coming from the cellar, too. It had often given me the creeps, though I would never admit that to my mother. I'd figured I was too old to let some silly noises scare me anyway. I'd been trying to act like the man of the house ever since my dad left when I was 7. I'd always hoped I would never turn out like my father, whom I hated with a burning passion. As far as he goes, I suppose I'd better just leave it at that. I lived in the house with my mother, Linda, and my uncle Kevin, on a vast piece of land in Steinen, Indiana. Steinen was a tiny piece of shit in the middle of nowhere. Nobody liked living there. I didn't have any friends because I was homeschooled and I'd never seen another kid my age in Steinen. Because we almost never left the house unless my mom had to go into town to buy groceries. However, I was always very close to Uncle Kevin. When I was little, he would tell me ghost stories right before bed, which my mother hated. "Stop it, Kev, you're going to give him nightmares," she would snap. Oh, did I get nightmares indeed. And sometimes it seemed as though the nightmares refused to end. They crept into the back of my mind like a spider crafting its web. The story he told most often was one about a monster with a contorted body and black eyes. According to the legend, as Uncle Kevin called it, even though I knew he made it up himself, the monster would come into your room if you were awake past your bedtime and hide in your closet, watching you the whole night. Of course, this was just a silly little tale that Kevin would tell me so that I wouldn't stay up late. Even so, I can't tell you how many times that horrible creature has popped into my head over the years. On this particular night, I decided to go to bed early in an attempt to sleep off a pounding headache. I lay down on my icy bed and sank beneath the covers, hiding my face from whatever may have been lurking inside of my head. After setting my glasses down on the nightstand beside my bed, I reached over and flicked the light off. The darkness made me feel alive in a very strange way, almost as though I was mesmerized by the nothingness. I looked around the room, seeing almost nothing but the pitch blackness surrounding me. I felt entranced, as if something was forcing me to look. Of course, there was nothing to look at least not with the eyes. This was something you could only witness within the deepest corridors of your mind. The part of your mind that you always dread visiting and can never seem to return from. Out of nowhere, I began to hear scratches upon the window above my bed. My eyes immediately burst open, and I felt like I was unable to close them again. What the fuck was that? I asked myself. Nothing. Of course. It was nothing. It couldn't have been anything, right? Right. Just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. No big deal. But in a moment of childish curiosity, I decided to peer out the window, just to make sure I was hearing nothing more than a tree branch brushing up against the glass. But then it hit me like a bag of bricks. There is no tree next to my window. Still, I decided it would be better to sleep it off and think more about it in the morning. Excuse me. It was probably all in my head. It had to be. I found it unusually difficult to fall asleep that night, as if somebody or something was trying to keep me up. I woke up the next morning with that sound still locked in my brain. It had to have been coming from somewhere. Sorry. But where? Shit, I had no idea. But then I remembered. The cellar. I built up as much courage as I could muster and slowly crept down into the abyss. Jesus, I hadn't been down there in a year, maybe longer. I had almost forgotten what it sounded like. Nothing but clouds of cobwebs and stacks of cardboard boxes shoved against the walls. Sorry. I rested through a couple of boxes until I stumbled upon a picture I'd drawn when I was a child. It was a sketch of a grotesque creature. It definitely wasn't human. The thing barely even had a face, just dark black eyes and no mouth. Its body was tall and thin and was contorted into a shape that I'd never seen before. The more I looked at the drawing, the more I was reminded of that story my uncle used to tell me. It appeared to be raining above the creature, and toward the bottom of the paper I had scribbled, "Please stay awake," in giant letters. I didn't know what the hell that was supposed to mean, but I folded up the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. I quickly made my way up the staircase into the kitchen and went about my day as usual, keeping that drawing in my mind, trying to remember what it meant and why I'd drawn it in the first place. I looked outside and noticed that it had begun to rain. I didn't want to think about that creature any longer, so I walked into my dimly lit room and plopped onto my bed. I fell asleep before I even knew it. When I awoke, it was exactly 3 a.m. This night was colder and darker than usual. The farm was soaked with rain from earlier in the evening. The moon was full and radiant. It almost didn't look real. For an instant, I glanced out of my bedroom window and I could swear I saw something walking quickly through the yard. When it spotted me, it slunk behind a tree, as if it were trying to hide from me. It looked exactly like what I had drawn when I was a child. I ran into Uncle Kevin's room and began shaking him awake. "Kevin! Kevin!" He rubbed the rim out of his eyes. "What's up, buddy? It's late," he asked, bewildered at my excitement. I looked at him in his bloodshot eyes and said, "I saw someone in the yard." Kevin looked at me with hesitation. "No, you probably just saw an animal. Get back to bed." I know what I saw. This was no animal. Or at least not one I'd ever seen, not in my worst fucking nightmares. I knew I couldn't tell him exactly what I'd seen, as he would never believe me. "No, Kevin, it was not an animal, please. It was a man. I think... Look, just go out, please, and check." Uncle Kevin leapt up and grabbed his shotgun from under the bed. "All right, come on, show me where he is. Let's try not to wake your mom. I'll scare the fucker off." We went outside and I pointed to the tree. I whispered to Kevin, "I saw him go behind that tree." My uncle bravely walked up to the tree and peered around it. Nothing. He searched the entire farm for well over half an hour, but he never found anyone or anything. "Let's go back in, bud. There's no one out here. Keep the doors locked tonight." He was wrong. I knew there was something out there. I crawled into bed and threw the covers over my face. I could hear the blistering wind coming from outside. It pierced my ears with a whistle that I thought only dogs could detect. Suddenly I heard a tapping sound upon my window. The sound grew louder with each tap. I tightened the blankets around my body. The taps slowly turned into knocks. Louder and louder and faster the knocks became. The knocks turned into bangs. I thought the glass was going to break. Then out of nowhere it stopped. No more taps. No more knocks. No more bangs. No more wind. I was relieved. Suddenly I heard a low, chilling voice in my ear. "Please, stay awake." It couldn't be. No, it couldn't be. I ran into the hallway, ready to make my way to my mother's room. When I saw it, whatever it was, I still don't know. It was holding Kevin's lifeless, mangled body in its arms, carved deeply into my uncle's torso were the words, "Please stay awake." I tried to let out a scream, but only silence filled the dead air. I sprinted to the door of my mother's bedroom and saw her body lying in the middle of the floor. She was covered in blood and her left arm had been ripped right out of its socket. Written next to her in her own blood were the words, "Please stay awake." I began to sob, and when I turned around, the creature was gone. I don't know where the hell it went, and I'm not sure I want to. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could and let out the loudest scream I could muster. I called the police and lied down on the floor, now blood-soaked. Waiting for them to arrive, it felt like hours. Finally, the police showed up to find me in the fetal position next to my mother's corpse. I told them everything I saw. I showed them my drawing. I told them about the taps, the knocks, the bangs. I told them what I'd seen outside. But of course, they wouldn't hear a word of it. Why would they? All they could see was the lonely kid hovering over his dead mother, her blood covering my clothes almost as much as it covered the floor. It's cold in this cell. It's dark and lonely. The silence is the only saving grace. Constant, peaceful silence. Tonight, it's raining outside. It's colder, darker, and wetter than ever. But unfortunately, I must stop writing now. I just heard a tap on my window.
Please stay.
Oh, listen to that. It's the voice that growls to me every night when I'm thinking about going to bed.
So yeah, I like that one. That one felt kind of like the stuff I grew up with. You know, scary.
Yeah,
stuff.
you know, things growling in your ear at night. Yeah, it's, you know, stuff you grew up with.
Look.
Whispering you from under the bed.
Alright.
I get you, man.
I'm stealing one of yours, Jonas.
Go for it. Take it.
For the approval of the Midnight Society, I present to you all The Stars of Bigface Marsh, written by Katheliax. It was cold and dark. That's all I could feel when I stared into the black abyss that made up its eyes. There was a tingling sensation in my feet that slowly rose up in my body like panic trapped inside of me. I felt changed. I don't know what he was doing to me, but it freaked me out. My heart started pounding, but that was only the part of my body that moved. I couldn't blink. I couldn't even breathe. All I could do was stare into those big black eyes, those big, beautiful eyes. Like a night sky full of breathtaking stars, but these stars were moving. Slowly but surely, not just moving, spinning. It was mesmerizing. It was hypnotizing. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. I wanted to thank him for these stars. They were the most beautiful things I'd ever laid my eyes upon. I wanted to praise him. I wanted to worship him. And then, like a warm embrace, my body was relieved of the coldness, and I gained the ability to move again. He released me and disappeared, but I knew what to do. I must worship him. I must be like him. With the Starry Night image still in mind, I slowly reached for my pocket knife. I went for my eyes first. They'd already seen the best things there are to see, so why bother with all the superior sights? I didn't need them anymore. The beautiful vision would forever be in my memories anyway. With the stars still in mind, I brought my knife to my eyes. First the left, then the right, forever blinding myself from my unworthy surroundings. There I could finally see my stars, nothing but the stars. With a pleased smile, I sat down and brought the knife to my legs, slowly peeling both the skin and the flesh away, leaving nothing but bone. It took ages, but I knew it would be worth it. I would be beautiful. Beautiful like him. Beautiful like Bigface. Chicken, Dan taunted. It's just forest. A forest where people go missing, Brick grunted in return. Normally he'd be up for a camping trip, but recently the walls in the city have been decorated with pictures of people who'd gone missing. You don't know the forest is where people go missing, Dan added. No one knows what's happened. Unless you're scared of Bigface. Brick shoved Dan high. You know I'm not superstitious, he yelled at him, but Dan only laughed. Oh, he's real, he taunted. I've seen him myself. Brick glared at him. "You're lying. You wouldn't be alive if you'd seen him," he shouted. "You sure know a lot about someone you claim don't exist," Dan continued. "You sure it's not 'cause you're a chicken?" "I'm not a chicken," Brick yelled again. Dan smirked. "Then prove it." "Fine. We'll go on your stupid camping trip," Brick answered, trying his hardest not to stutter. "Deal. I'll see you on Saturday, 3 p.m., front of the forest," Dan instructed. "Deal. I'll see you," Brick agreed, and the two boys parted ways. Walking home, Brick felt terrified already, but he didn't want to be a chicken. It was just stupid superstition. After all, most towns had their own tales, right? Brick laughed to himself, feeling a tad bit braver. Surely none of them sounded as silly as Bigface. For a while, Brick started to wonder why he'd even be scared in the first place. He snorted. A massive floating head. Surely whoever came up with the tale must have been drunk. What would a floating head even do? Headbutt you to death? Brick laughed. No, Bigface was definitely just a myth. A silly myth indeed. When Brick came home, he threw himself on the sofa and turned on his PlayStation. He knew his mother would be against it, but what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. He played for what seemed like hours, until he suddenly heard a car pull up. Shit, he thought to himself and quickly turned everything off, running upstairs, and only just made it before he heard the front door unlock. He pulled the first book he could reach out of his bag, and turned to a random page, pretending to be deep into homework. After a few minutes, he heard a knock on his door and looked up to see his mother peeking into his room. They started some small talk about Brick's day at school, and eventually Brick asked his mom if he could spend the night at Dan's place on Saturday. His mother smiled at him, pleased that he was finally getting along with someone. "Sure, honey," she replied. "Do you want to ride there?" Brick rejected her offer, knowing he couldn't tell her where he was really going. He deemed it better to go by bike. He knew Dan would bring a tent. Dan's parents were never home to notice what Dan was doing anyway. Brick sighed, wishing he was as lucky as Dan. Brick would be 12 in a few months, but his mother insisted on treating him as if he was 7, and surely she'd never let him stay the night in the forest. She didn't need to know that's where they were going. "Thanks for letting me go, Mom," Brick murmured, returning to his pretend homework. His mother smiled in return before heading downstairs to cook dinner. Brick sighed with relief, though a part of him wished he wouldn't have agreed to the sleepover. The confidence from earlier was gone, and he was definitely terrified again. That night, Brick barely slept. Whenever he closed his eyes, he'd see floating faces grinning at him. One of the nightmares was him rushing through the forest, with a massive face chasing him and its horrifying laughter echoing in the woods. Brick's eyes flew open, and he breathed heavy for a while. Eventually, he rolled onto his side, attempting to fall asleep again. And there, on his extra pillow, laid a big mask, grinning at him. Brick was up in an instant, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. He looked around frantically to ensure he was awake for real this time. After rubbing his eyes for what seemed like minutes, he finally checked his alarm. Still 3 hours of sleep left. Brick sighed, wishing this terrible night would just end. The nightmares continued playing out for the rest of the night, and Brick was still tired when his alarm rang. However, he didn't want to go back to sleep, though he definitely wanted to stay home. He couldn't have Dan calling him a chicken in front of everyone at school, so he got out of bed and started getting ready. Brick barely had any breakfast. He made sure to hide the food he threw out well in the garbage so his mom wouldn't notice. He spent the rest of his time packing his backpack before he yelled goodbye to his mom and ventured out on his bike. Brick's heart was pounding as he cycled, and he knew it wasn't from exhaustion, judging by the slow tempo he kept. All the way there, Brick kept telling himself to relax, calm down. Bigface wasn't real. He and Dan would be just fine. They had fun camping in the woods. The only thing they'd find in there would be the trees and animals, Brick thought. The normal animals. Big floating heads weren't real. Brick and Dan would prove that. Brick would never let Dan know he was scared. Puffing out his chest a bit, he finally pulled up to the forest where Dan was waiting for him. The boys spent most of their time setting up their tent and collecting wood for a fire. When everything was finally ready, the sun had set. The boys sat around the fire, keeping warm. Brick was happy they lit the fire before it had gone dark. The fire provided enough light and warmth for the boys to stay up for a bit, though fear was starting to sneak up on Brick. The noises in the forest started to get on Brick's nerves, and even the slightest sound made him twitch a little. Brick moved closer to the fire to pretend his slight shivering was from being cold. Suddenly, Brick heard a loud snap that made him jump. Out of fear, he turned around to see where the noise came from, and he found Dan laughing out loud while holding both ends of the stick he broke. "Dude, you should have seen your face," Dan laughed. "Your reaction was priceless." "It's not funny," Brick shouted, standing up to confront him. Dan stopped laughing. "Good. Brick thought. It seemed he had some effect on Dan after all. He showed him not to mess with him like that. He showed him he wasn't a chicken. Don't you have anything better to do than joke around all day? Why don't you start taking things seriously? Brick growled angrily, looking down at Dan. But Dan wasn't looking at Brick. Dan was looking at something behind Brick. What? Cat's got your tongue? Brick continued angrily, but Dan only pointed at something behind Brick. Yeah, I'm not falling for your tricks, Brick snorted. It wasn't until Dan's eyes got wide with fear and his pointing more desperate that Brick finally turned around. And there, a few yards away, Brick saw something move. It had a human-like silhouette, but there was something off about the way it moved. As it got closer, Brick noticed how thin the person was. They must have been lost and not eaten for days, Brick thought to himself. The boys just kept staring at it. And eventually Brick realized the reason behind the thin appearance. Surely the creature was human. Or at least it used to be. The person's body was literally just bones. But what really scared the boys was the face. The entire body was missing its skin and flesh, but the face was intact. However, the area around the eyes was covered with dried blood, and the eyes appeared to have been slashed. Brick stared long enough at the morbid face to realize this person was one of the missing people from the posters he'd seen. Feeling sick and terrified, he turned to Dan so they could run. But Dan was being held by another walking skeleton, its face just as terrifying as the first one. Another missing person, Brick assumed. He took a step back in fear and started to look around for a means of escape. But wherever he looked, he only saw more and more skeletons appearing. Brick didn't know what to do. He couldn't leave Dan, he couldn't spot any way out. Eventually, he saw something else coming out from between the trees. Something bigger. Brick froze in place, completely unable to move. Now both he and Dan were forced to look at the creature emerging from the forest. Brick started to feel a tingling sensation rising up from his feet, and he soon realized the creature was little more than a face. Bigface, he thought to himself, and despite their rising panic, Brick and Dan remained rooted in place as Bigface floated closer. At the same time, the walking skeletons began gathering behind the boys, also staring at Bigface. It wasn't until the enormous bulbous head of the creature was before the boys that Brick noticed its eyes. Big, black eyes. Its big, beautiful black eyes full of stars? Both Brick and Dan continued staring into the eyes until Bigface eventually disappeared. The skeletons let go of Dan and started to leave as well. Both Brick and Dan dropped to their knees, searching for rocks. But not just any rocks. They needed sharp rocks. Rocks that were sharp enough to cut. Bigface had shown them the stars, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to see them again. They needed to worship him, to be like him. They needed to be beautiful.
Yet another unrealistic beauty standard for women.
You should start playing your games like you should have done, Rick.
Also, Rick, if you ever decide to go into architecture, your name should definitely be Brick Griffin.
Okay.
Just saying.
I will consider that.
Big face.
Big face.
Big face.
Mm-hmm.
From the makers of Bigfoot.
Look at the first two chat messages are nice story, and I don't know how I feel about that story.
Bigfoot feels offended.
It is pretty much a flat 7 out of 10 on creepypasta, and I feel that's pretty accurate. It is okay.
Problem is, there's this one, like, Gravity Falls monster that appears in, like, one of their little shorts. That's like a giant floating head that's, like, chanting stuff backwards, and I couldn't stop thinking of Bigface as that.
Oh god, what's the... Oh, I kept thinking it was the like N64 creepypasta thing, where it's like every copy of Mario 64 is customized. and it's
Oh,
the
yeah.
giant Wario face coming down the hallway.
God.
I kept thinking of that. I there was like 2 times during that story I like had to pause for a moment and stifle my laughter because I was gonna start just laughing out loud at that.
Nice.
Ax.
The internet has broken us.
Uh,
Oh my goodness. Alright, I would like to hand things off to you, Rick.
Okay.
Yes, baby, I hear you.
Which one of these do I want to read? I'll go with submitting this for the approval of the Midnight Society. Why We Fear the Dark by Jeremiah Sewell. I don't have much time, so read every word carefully, because detail is not a vanity I can afford right now. My name is Seth Anderson. I'm a 43-year-old accountant from Washington. I am married, I have 2 daughters, and I was mortally afraid of clowns for a time in my life. That time lasted from my 10th birthday party up until last night. Before I delve into why I'm typing this at 3 in the morning, I need you to ask yourself if you fear the dark. If you answered no, you need to carefully reconsider your answer, for that would have been my first response a mere couple of hours ago. Now, there's nothing I fear more. At this point, I would live with clowns just to forget what happened. I know that sounds funny coming from a near middle-aged man on the internet, but hopefully you'll take my words into consideration if you remotely care about your mental health, let alone your life. There's a reason we were born into fearing the dark, but it's far from the scientific explanations that have been built up over the years. There really isn't a right word for what it is, but the best I can say is that it's just wrong. It's not the dark itself, it's what festers in it, what is unearthed when the sun hides behind the horizon. It's everything wrong with the world, both physically and morally. When it happens, it's almost as if time is shattered, and nothing makes any sense. I remember everything so vividly, but to recall the event is almost like having a nightmare. It all started a few hours after I returned home. I live in the woodland area, so it's quite a drive back from where I work. I was raised in the woods, and most of my childhood consisted of walking trails and climbing trees, so it only felt right to settle down away from the city lights to let my kids experience the wonders of the outdoors. To clear my mind of documents and papers, I walk the rugged trails within the forest behind my house, which allows me to relieve some familiar feelings from when I was a kid. Overtime booked me an extra few hours, so by the time I arrived home, the kids and wife were already in bed. Without thinking, I grabbed my walking stick and water bottle and flew out the glass sliding doors. Almost forgetting to close the doors, I quickly slid them shut and trudged through the unkempt yard and found myself at the edge of the forest. I gazed into the piney wonderland, but my eyes only met with a wall of darkness. This is very strange, because the forecast for last night was a full moon, which should have given ample light to walk the paths. The moonlight was almost non-existent, as if the land was absorbing it. After turning on my phone flash on, I began to walk into the abyss. Around a quarter of a mile in, I looked up from the path and realized I can't see more than a few feet in front of me. It was like looking into a tub of oil, the trees drowning in the dark until you pulled them to the surface. And ever stranger was the fact I couldn't hear anything. The only sounds to accompany me were the sounds of my footsteps and breathing. I mean, this was very unnerving. Even during the winter, you could hear the sounds of trees rustling in the wind. Pushing the thought out of my head, I walked faster and turned my gaze to the ground. Then I stopped. Rather than a worn dirt path, I was standing on underbrush and shrubs. Something wasn't right, and every feeling in my body was screaming it at this point. I turned around and walked for what seemed like an hour, looking for the path, but it felt like I wasn't moving at all. At that moment, my flashlight flicked off. My mind went blank. All I could feel was an overwhelming sense of dread and terror. It was like thousands of blades were hovering inches from my body. Moving felt wrong, breathing felt wrong, just being felt wrong. I frantically pressed the power button on my phone, but to no avail. For some unknown reason, the sense of an impending doom was creeping on me. As seconds passed by, the closer whatever I thought was after me was getting closer. My body shot into overdrive, and I began sprinting further into the void. As I stumbled through the forest, my eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. I could see faint outlines of trees and bushes. I ran for what felt like hours, hoping to break into a clearing or just find a source of light. That's when my phone started ringing. I stopped dead in my tracks, slowly grabbed for my phone and raised it to my face. All I could feel was horror. The contact read off as Mom. I didn't know what to do or what to think. I couldn't tell if I was more horrified because I was lost in a void of a forest that I know better than the back of my hand, or the fact that I was supposedly being called by the woman who died giving birth to me. I mean, I couldn't even make a call because I didn't have any service, let alone receive one. The caller didn't have a number. It was just a blank where the number would be. I had so many thoughts racing through my head, and I never had a contact on my phone that went by Mom. Reluctantly, I slid the answer button and raised the phone to my ear. Nothing. I heard absolutely nothing. I tried speaking, but the only sound that came from the other side was static. As I was about to hang up, the caller hung up. With bigger problems and a malfunction, I took advantage of the flashlight of the phone. I had 30% battery left, which would have been enough to find my way home. Before I even turned on the flashlight switch, the number called again. Dumbfounded, I answered once again and listened. Just as before, I heard nothing. I tried speaking once again, but still received no reply. The caller hung up. I brushed it off, turned on the flashlight, and began jogging in the direction of home. At that point, I wanted nothing more than to get to a place of safety. About half an hour later, it happened again. My phone buzzed, alerting me to an incoming call. This time I answered angrily and shouted at the caller, asking them why they were calling. Then I heard something. It was faint, but it was definitely there. It was the sound of a man. His words were inaudible, but he sounded very familiar. I replied to him by asking him to speak louder, but the words were still inaudible. The caller didn't hang up this time, so I did. As soon as the connection was cut, though, the contact called again. This time I screamed curses into a phone, threatening him with whatever was on the top of my head. He spoke again. His voice was much louder, but heavy static prevented me from putting any of the words together. I angrily hung up and switched to the flashlight. Not even a minute later, the number called again. I had no intention of speaking further, but force of habit prompted me to answer, and before I could end the call, the man screamed louder than before. Though through the heavy static, it sounded almost exactly like me. I shakily ended the call and switched back to the app. That's when I heard it. The screaming didn't stop when I ended the call. I could hear it a distance away behind me, growing louder by the second. It wouldn't stop. The static filter was thicker. My heart was racing and I felt the urge to run. My legs felt like concrete, but I managed to get into running pace up the hill. The screaming was getting closer and closer. No matter how fast I ran, it sounded like it was only 10 yards behind me and getting closer. It was deafening. I felt my ears were going to burst at any second. I couldn't hear my own breathing at this point. It was getting closer. It felt like it was only a few feet behind me. Then out of nowhere, it stopped. Screaming or not, I wasn't slowing down. I ran until it felt like my heart was pumping battery acid, and then I ran even more. The further I ran, the easier it was to see. About 20 minutes, I could make out the trees. I shut off the flashlight to save power, then glanced over my shoulder to see if whatever was screaming was chasing me. There did not seem to be anything, so I slowed my pace to a walk. Hours seemed to pass, and I walked so long that it should have been sunrise. The clock on my phone was stuck at 00, though, and I had no way of telling what time it was or how long I had been in the forest. After trudging for what seemed like an eternity, I broke into a clearing. Relieved, I checked my surroundings for any landmarks, but I was clueless to where I was. Then I saw something in the middle of the clearing. It was a giant hole, a circular shape with a diameter of about 150 feet. I crept towards it to get a better look, and couldn't believe my own eyes. It was almost like a stone tower, but built into the ground. The walls seemed to be made of cobblestone material, and there were wooden planks sticking out of the walls that wrapped around the entire tower like a spiral staircase. I could see roughly 20 meters down, then it was just black, as if the dark were a liquid setting in a glass. I've been walking these woods for a decade and have never seen this thing before. I was left completely shocked. To my utter dismay, my phone rang again. Rather than a call, it was a text message from the same caller from earlier. Do you see me? I immediately scanned the area around me. I watched the tree line for movement, but saw nothing. After assuring nothing was around me, I leaned over the edge of the hole and looked into the inverted tower. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. Down on the wall directly below me, I saw a hand reaching out from the blackness. Beside it was a face. My face. I don't think I've ever screamed as loud as I did in that moment. The thing mimicking me had an ear-to-ear grin plastered on its face, but the most disturbing part were its eyelid sockets. Just before I could get up to run, the thing started to twitch rapidly, opening its mouth to release that god-awful static scream that haunted me hours before. It started to crawl up the wall, its limbs making movements only possible if every bone in your body were broken. There isn't much I remember after that. I recall running the hell out of that place and back into the trees. After that, it was a blur of trees and screaming. Last thing I see before blacking out is the back porch light of my house, illuminating my screaming wife and my 2 girls. My wife called an ambulance, but I woke from unconsciousness before they even arrived. I declined their service and lied to my wife, saying I was just a little lost and passed out from a panic attack. She was reluctant to go back to bed, but eventually did. That was 2 hours ago. About 20 minutes after they went to bed, I heard it again. The screaming returned, and it won't go away. I'm looking outside my window now, and I can see it. It's just standing out there by the edge of the trees. It doesn't move. It's been standing there for hours. I tried calling the police, but the lines have been cut, and the service just won't go through. I tried to wake up my family, but the staircase up to their rooms is gone. It's like I never had a staircase at all. There's just a hallway opening 10 feet off the ground. No matter how much noise I make, they won't reply. All I hear is soft wailing echoing from their rooms. I tried leaving, but the doors just won't open. It's like they were welded to the wall. I've been here for hours, yet the clock won't move from 3. The screaming won't stop. I am not sure if it ever will at this point. Not sure what else I can do besides hope that this email gets to someone out there. Please, don't be brave, fear the dark. Just stay in the light. It can't follow you there. That thing is still just standing there. Wait. I think it just moved.
Nice.
The end.
Eek.
The end.
And they all lived happily ever after.
That's the abridged version by Stoker.
Well, that was pretty spoop. I
It was.
appreciate that spoop.
That
It
was
could have been written better.
It could have been. But, you know, what couldn't be? What couldn't
It
be?
is a creepypasta after all. I can't complain too much. There's most of the grammar is correct. It didn't call anything hyper realistic. It's okay.
They didn't go on a 7-paragraph description of a gore scene that you would take in like 2 seconds if you saw it in real life.
Yeah.
with some of these, I can tell that they're really going for certain special effects. Like you can feel the CGI in some of these.
And it looked exactly like that one transformation scene from The Thing. You know, the one where, like, the neck extends out and he's got, like, spider legs and it's so gnarly. Anyway.
It walked backwards on the ceiling, kind of herky-jerky, like it was being badly edited. Anyway.
And there was this weird creature who stretched it out weird ways. Oh, no!
They're describing it in such a way that they're hoping to sell the television rights.
Right.
You thought I'd forgotten about Stretchy, didn't you, Jonas?
Yeah.
So, this one I kind of skimmed over, so I'm mostly going in cold.
Okay.
It's not on any of the lists or suggestions, so hopefully it's pretty good. I like
It's not on any list anywhere.
Yeah, that's right, it doesn't exist. I'm getting it from the ether. From the Ethernet. Okay. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This story is called I Am a Ghost. So the major plot twist is spoiled right off the gate. I Am a Ghost, written by Johnny Strange. It's that time of year again. Another stupid Halloween night with a bunch of stupid kids breaking into my house just to prove they have the balls to enter a haunted house. Well, I'm a ghost. Or at least that's what they call me. I'm not entirely sure what I am. I just float around this empty house when no one is around. To keep me sane, I also write this diary of mine. It takes a lot of effort for me to manifest myself in order to touch physical things, but it's totally worth it. It might sound mundane to you, but I actually enjoy my time here. It's very peaceful. Until a bunch of stupid kids decided to show up every dang Halloween. Each year bringing 1 or 2 new faces. This year was no exception. The first one to enter was a familiar face. A chubby kid, short curly hair, cheeks splattered with chocolate freckles and flanked by 2 big round ears. A loud creak echoed through the empty halls as he took the first step onto the old wooden floor. His breathing was shallow and rapid, awkwardly puffing his chest in a sad attempt to appear nonchalant. The faint beam of his garrety mini rugged light failed to cut through the thick darkness that is waiting to engulf him and his friends into nothingness. "Oh, come on, guys, stop being a wuss," Chubby taunted his friends. "Are you sure this is a good idea? Let's just go and grab more candy. I don't like it here," a short but wiser kid replied. "Look, Kenny, we do this every fucking year. Don't you want to get laid? The girls in school would totally think we're badasses. Besides, I have my eyes on Debbie Reynolds, and I'll be damned if she isn't the slightest impress." Chubby gaining more confidence. "God damn it, Billy, you're 12. Do you even know the meaning of getting laid?" said a tall, scrawny kid. Yes," Chubby replied unassertively. "Let's just get this over with so we can all go home and stuff our face full of chewy giant sweet tarts," a kid with huge spectacles sighed. The rest hesitantly agreed and stepped in. One of them murmured something. I think it was a prayer or something. The thumping of their hearts grew louder as they ventured deeper into the dark halls. I started with their flashlight, lightly touching it so that it flickered. "Oh, shit! I forgot to change my batteries!" Chubby laughed nervously. His friends flipped him the bird at the same time and shook their heads in unison. That made me chuckle a little. "Fuck, did you hear that?" the tall kid whispered. "Hear what? Stop messing around," said the short kid. "Pussy," Chubby mocked the tall kid. "I swear, one more word from your big fat mouth—" I interrupted the tall kid with a light whisper. His face turned pale. He choked on his saliva, decided not to finish his sentence, and ran all the way out of the house. "What's his problem?" scoffed the kid with the large spectacles. "What a wuss. Come on, we'll just go upstairs and then we're done." "Oh, Debbie, here comes Billy the Willy." Dang it, I thought to myself. It looks like the other three kids couldn't hear me. I was low on energy. It takes a considerable amount of effort even for a whisper or a chuckle to be heard. Frustrated, I let out an ear-piercing scream. Well, at least it was ear-piercing to me. Those three kids barely even noticed it. They just stopped in their tracks, listened for a minute or so, and went on. I understand that some people are sensitive to a certain frequency and some people are not, which explains why the tall kid was the only one able to hear me. The others were completely oblivious. But I wasn't about to give up. With all my might, I forcefully willed myself into a terrifying physical form. The usual horror cliché I heard from kids. Long, dark hair, dark red liquid oozing out of my empty eye sockets, exposed muscle tissue, and bits of broken bone sticking out of my body. I have to admit, if I were to look in the mirror now, I would have shat my pants. It's horrifying. As they were heading up the stairs, I appeared in front of them, and with my last bit of energy, I shrieked. It caught them by surprise. They screamed like little girls and ran out into the night. I let out a sigh of relief. I hope I scared the crap out of them, and they won't come back. I was exhausted, but I was also desperate. They say there is nothing to fear but fear itself. Yet in our world, that isn't true. Many things are worse than fear. And one of those things is in this house, locked in the upstairs room, waiting to be set free. But I'm getting weaker year after year. Soon I won't be able to scare the kids out of this house anymore. Soon, they will make it upstairs. Soon, they will unlock the door.
Nice. What was that one called again?
Store.
It's just called I Am a Ghost. It's
Hey,
not too
Richard.
bad. It's pretty fun. There were some typos in this one. I just kind of corrected them as I went along. Except for one, I couldn't figure out what it was trying to say, but it's pretty good. I enjoyed that one.
I am a ghost. Ask me anything.
I am a
we
ghost.
see-
Ask me anything.
Can we see through you?
Sure, why not?
Are you
Yeah.
naked?
Well, I mean, listen. maybe that's a question that, if you're asking me.
As a ghost.
As a ghost,
As a ghost.
well, you can't take it with you.
Yeah,
true.
it's like, why would a ghost wear clothes? I mean, did the clothes die with the person?
Did the clothes die with the person? Yes. They
Sometimes
were all fixed up on my souling machine.
Oh.
Whoa.
All right.
Anyway.
It's just about to hit midnight, but if you, and I'm the person that started it, so...
Well,
Should we
I
call
mean,
it
we've
here?
gone through the circle twice now.
Yeah.
So, and we do have one more of these streams left on the actual Halloween itself.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We should have something
So-
special. Halloween.
Yeah, maybe we should hold off on any more for tonight.
Yeah.
Unless anyone has something they're really burning to read.
Not tonight. I think this is the perfect time to call it, honestly.
Good. I agree.
Okay, then.
Okay.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed this latest meeting of the Midnight Society. I hope you're not too spooked to sleep well tonight.
Just prepare yourself for next week is Halloween. Get your spookies ready
Yes.
then.
Prepare yourself for stuff.
Ultimate spookiness.
Come on, Stoker, let's say you're doomed. Get the
Okay, you're
spirit.
doomed.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Doom
All
stuff.
of you are doomed. Doom
You're
stuff.
doomed on Halloween.
real-
Alright.
And remember,
You can't
the real
scare me. I'm doomed.
the real
See,
scary
no one gets it.
the twist was that the real scary thing was yourself, mankind, or possibly the guy you didn't suspect. It was Ray. It was Ray.
How
I
dare
like
you? This
I like how that-
backstabbing when he's not even here to defend himself?
That's
Best
what makes
time
him.
to backstab someone.
That's what makes him the least likely.
Yeah.
Jeez. You forgot all those times where I was the murderer. Jeez.
That's true. GC is extra sus.
That's
Okay,
true.
but we know if GC's going to be the murderer because he's Canadian. Therefore, he's contractually obligated to say sorry before he murders someone.
Oh my god.
Or say, hey, is that me in the camera? I didn't do it.
Yeah.
I knew it would be a Canurderer.
Nerder.
A Canadianer. A Canadian.
All right.
Alright.
Good night, everybody.
You
Oh,
know,
let me do the thing. Let me think.
Oh,
I now declare this meeting of the Minute Society officially closed.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Dong dong.
Dude ding.
Good night, everybody.
good night.
I need the Law and Order sound effect.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.